was a nomadic lifestyle, which must have been really quite difficult because he was that much younger than his sisters. So it was almost as if it was just a part of the baggage that went along with the moves.
In a stunning twist that's left royal watchers across the world in disbelief, Buckingham Palace has reportedly revealed that the Queen's youngest son may be the next King of England. The shocking announcement has sent shockwaves through the monarchy, raising questions about succession, loyalty, and royal secrets long kept from the public eye. With whispers of hidden wills and last-minute royal decrees, this revelation could rewrite history itself. So could this unexpected prince truly rise to the throne? Today, we uncover the truth behind the palace's revelation. The Quiet Prince. It was the morning of March 10, 1964, when the final chapter of Queen Elizabeth II's family story quietly began inside Buckingham Palace. The corridors of royal power had seen coronations, crises, and triumphs. But that day, something different stirred behind those gilded doors. The Queen was in labor with her fourth child, a son who would be named Edward Anthony Richard Louis. He would grow up as the youngest of four siblings, yet from the moment he entered the world, his story would unfold differently from the rest. By the time Edward arrived, his family already stood on defined paths. Charles, the eldest, bore the lifelong burden of the crown's expectation. Anne, the only daughter, had already begun showing the steel of independence that would later define her. Andrew, still a child, carried the easy charm of youth, a contrast to the discipline that ruled the household. And then came Edward, the quiet prince, whose birth carried within it an act of quiet defiance. That morning, Queen Elizabeth made a decision that stunned not just her household, but the royal establishment itself. She asked Prince Philip to be present at the birth, an act that, in 1964 Britain, was nothing short of revolutionary. No royal father before him had ever stepped into that room. It was a space governed by silence, protocol, and tradition, a place where doctors and nurses attended queens, but never their husbands. The men waited elsewhere, pacing in stately corridors until word of the birth was formally delivered. But Elizabeth was no ordinary monarch. She was a woman of her era, quietly observant of change, yet never reckless with it. In the early 1960s, women's magazines began to question long-held customs, urging fathers to share in the emotional experience of childbirth. For a queen who had spent her life balancing the demands of duty with the needs of family, this was her way of saying that tradition could yield just slightly to humanity. Philip, who had always longed to be closer to his children despite the barriers of royal formality, welcomed the invitation. Witnesses later recalled that his presence brought a calm strength to the room, a symbol of partnership at a time when the monarchy rarely showed its softer side. It was a small gesture, but it marked a turning point. Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, something subtle yet profound shifted. The idea that even the crown could make space for intimacy, that beginning private, progressive, and deeply personal, seemed to set the rhythm of Edward's life. Unlike his siblings, he would not chase the headlines or dominate front pages, while Charles's every movement carried the weight of succession and Anne's independence captured public fascination. Edward chose stillness over spectacle. His birth, met with polite enthusiasm rather than national frenzy, almost foreshadowed the man he would become, one shaped by quiet resolve rather than ceremony. Historians often look back on that March morning as more than just the birth of the Queen's youngest son. It was, in a sense, the birth of a new kind of royal one who lived between tradition and transformation, a prince who began his journey not with fanfare, but with a whisper that would, in time, echo through the monarchy itself. And yet, even now, the question lingers beneath the surface in a family built on hierarchy and heritage. Could the quietest son be the one destined to change it all? So could the quietest son, born in whispers rather than fanfare, truly be the hidden force reshaping the future of the monarchy? Stay tuned. The hidden heir. For many, the name Prince Edward still drifts quietly beneath the thrones of his more famous siblings. His life has never carried the thunder of Charles's destiny, Anne's defiance, or Andrew's controversies. Yet buried in the calm of his story lies a quiet transformation, one that began from the moment of his unconventional birth. The very act that brought him into the world, his father's unprecedented presence in the delivery room, foreshadowed a truth that history is only now beginning to notice. Edward's path was always meant to be different. While his siblings were born into a monarchy still shackled by distance and formality, Edward arrived at a time when the crown was beginning to soften its edges. The early years of Charles and Anne were marked by formality, when their mother's new reign demanded her near-constant presence in state affairs and global tours. They grew up largely under the care of nannies, while the Queen and Philip balanced duty with the daunting weight of rebuilding Britain's post-war image. But by 1964, when Edward was born, the family had begun to learn something precious: how to be both royal and human. Edward's childhood reflected that shift. He enjoyed a more direct bond with his parents than any of his older siblings ever had. Prince Philip, once the distant naval officer whose absences defined Charles's early life, was now more present, more grounded. He encouraged Edward to explore, to ask questions, to play freely in the open air rather than live bound by protocol. Those closest to the family later noted that Edward's steady nature, his calmness in contrast to royal chaos, was shaped by those early moments of quiet, fatherly influence. Within the family circle, the differences were unmistakable. Andrew, only 4 years older, was spirited and loud, a spark of mischief in a palace built on order. Anne, already entering her teenage years, carried the same determination that would later make her one of the most hard-working royals of all. Against such vibrant personalities, Edward seemed to disappear into the background. But in truth, he wasn't fading. He was observing. Even as a child, he absorbed the rhythm of royal life without rushing to make himself seen. There were, however, moments that quietly shaped his perspective. In 1969, when Edward was only 5 years old, he met Neil Armstrong, the man who had just stepped on the moon. The encounter left him awestruck. For Edward, the significance wasn't just in the achievement itself, but in what it represented: the quiet courage to go where no one else had gone. It was a lesson that would echo throughout his life, that greatness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply endures. That same year, the monarchy began opening its doors to a new kind of public scrutiny. The BBC documentary Royal Family revealed the Windsors as people, not just symbols. Edward appeared briefly alongside his parents and siblings, a small presence in a groundbreaking moment that changed how the world saw them. But even there, his pattern held. He stood slightly apart, never competing, never demanding. It wasn't timidity, it was a choice. Edward's early years were built on contrasts: privilege without arrogance, visibility without intrusion, duty without desperation. The foundations of a different kind of royal were being quietly laid, one whose influence would not come from the spotlight, but from the spaces between it. And in the soft hum of palace life, where power and silence often meet, a question began to form. Could the son who never sought the crown be the one most fit to carry it? And now, could the prince who shunned the spotlight be the one destined to wield true royal power? Keep watching. The Education of a Reluctant Royal. When Edward left the safety of Windsor for the rugged hills of Scotland, few expected what was about to unfold. His destination, Gordonstoun, had already built a complicated reputation within the royal family. For Prince Philip, it had been a place of strength, a crucible where character was forged through hardship and endurance. For Charles, it had been something else entirely: cold, unforgiving, and, as he once confessed, a prison in kilts. Yet for Edward, the school would become something far more transformative. From the moment he arrived, Edward seemed to adapt where others had resisted. He did not carry the crushing weight of future kingship, nor the scrutiny that had followed his elder brother from boyhood. Without those expectations, he found a rhythm that suited him: the structure, the challenge, and the quiet dignity of hard work. Gordonstoun's days were long and demanding, filled with discipline and outdoor training, but Edward thrived under the pressure. He rose steadily, earning the trust of teachers and the respect of his peers, eventually becoming head boy, a rare honor that spoke to his quiet authority and natural steadiness. But it wasn't just leadership that defined his time there. Hidden within the rigorous school schedule was something unexpected, a discovery that would later set him apart from every royal who came before him. His love for the theater drama, to Edward, was not an escape from the crown, but an exploration of humanity. He found fascination in storytelling, in the power of emotion, and in the courage it took to stand before an audience and connect. It was a passion that defied royal convention, creative, expressive, deeply personal. And it revealed a side of him that the palace, so long driven by restraint, rarely showed the world. When Edward moved on to Jesus College, Cambridge, his curiosity only deepened. He studied history, but his heart remained drawn to performance and the arts. On campus, there were no courtiers, no protocols, no royal buffers, only students. Here, Edward became simply Edward, the approachable young man who acted in plays, joined rehearsals, and shared meals without ceremony. Those who knew him then described him as humble, intelligent, and quietly independent, a prince learning to live as a person. It was this growing sense of self that led to one of the boldest decisions of his early life. After Cambridge, Edward went halfway across the world to New Zealand, taking up a post at Wanganui Collegiate School. For 6 months, he lived as a teacher, a mentor, and a theater assistant. To his students, he wasn't His Royal Highness. He was Mr. Windsor, the calm instructor who helped them build sets, rehearse lines, and see the world through stories. He shared modest quarters, taught lessons, and lived the simple rhythm of ordinary life, something almost no royal before him had ever done. The experience changed him. In Wanganui's classrooms, stripped of pomp and title, Edward found something precious: freedom. The people treated him not as a symbol, but as a man. For the first time, he could breathe without the weight of tradition pressing against his every move. He saw how people lived without crowns or courtiers, how real influence came not from ceremony, but from character. That season abroad became the quiet foundation of who he would become, a prince unafraid to exist beyond the boundaries of his birthright. It was there that Edward's quiet conviction began to take shape. Leadership need not shout to be heard. Perhaps that, more than anything, explains why, decades later, whispers within Buckingham Palace now speak of him not as the forgotten son, but as the one destined to restore what the monarchy lost: dignity through humility, and power through quiet grace. Because sometimes the true heir isn't the one who seeks the throne, but the one who never needed it to lead. But what hidden qualities quietly positioned Edward as the royal destined to restore the monarchy's dignity? And will the world finally notice? The prince who chose his own path. For a royal son in the 1980s, military service was almost a rite of passage. Discipline, bravery, and duty were expected, especially in a family where such values had been woven into its very fabric for generations. Prince Edward, as the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, appeared to follow this path naturally. He joined the Royal Marines, a branch celebrated for its toughness and elite status, echoing the service of his father, Prince Philip, and the daring exploits of his brother, Prince Andrew. Even Charles had fulfilled his naval obligations, completing his own term with measured diligence. To the outside world, Edward's choice seemed conventional, almost inevitable, the predictable step of a prince seeking to prove himself in line with family tradition. Yet from the beginning, Edward's temperament diverged from the military mold. Where the Marines demanded relentless endurance, rigid hierarchy, and physical toughness, Edward's strengths lay elsewhere: creativity, thoughtfulness, and a natural sensitivity that thrived in spaces where imagination could flourish. He had already shown this in his early life, from discovering a passion for theater at Gordonstoun to teaching drama and history in New Zealand, a path far removed from the drills and rigors of military life. By 1987, just months into his Marine training, Edward reached a decision that would shock both the palace and the nation. He quit. The headlines were merciless. Newspapers branded him a disappointment, a young prince who had abandoned duty. For the monarchy, built on ideals of service, stoicism, and sacrifice, it was a story that seemed almost scandalous. To many, Edward's choice confirmed the narrative that had shadowed him since birth, that he was the different one, quiet, reflective, and outside the limelight. But the truth was more complex. The Marines had never aligned with his character or aspirations. He had entered that world not out of passion, but expectation. Walking away was an act of courage in itself, a refusal to let tradition dictate a life he could not live fully. Inside the royal household, The impact was immediate and deeply felt. Prince Philip, who had faced the chaos of war and the discipline of naval command, was reportedly furious. To him, military service symbolized honor, resilience, and the forging of character. Edward's departure cut sharply against this family ideal, challenging what it meant to uphold duty under the crown. Even Edward himself later admitted the Marines were the wrong fit, that the path he left behind was never truly his own. Yet within that moment of apparent failure lay a revelation. Walking away freed Edward to pursue what truly inspired him: creativity, engagement with people, and work that resonated with his unique strengths. In retrospect, his resignation from the Marines became a pivotal turning point. It was the first clear signal that Edward would carve a path apart from the royal script, one guided by talent, judgment, and authenticity rather than expectation. That decision, once criticized as weakness, quietly laid the foundation for a life of measured influence. The very qualities that, decades later, may explain why Edward stands as a figure capable of leadership in a monarchy seeking stability, insight, and dignity. The question remains as whispers circulate through Buckingham Palace: could the prince who once defied convention be the one destined to restore its integrity? For Edward, the answer lies not in headline-making bravado, but in the quiet authority of choices made true to himself. And how did Edward, once overlooked and unconventional, quietly rise to become the steadfast force now shaping the monarchy's future? Stay glued. Edward's rise to duty and influence. It was that steady, measured reliability that quietly transformed Edward from the youngest, often overlooked prince into a linchpin of the modern monarchy. When he married Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, the Queen granted him the title Earl of Wessex, a choice that surprised many. Unlike a traditional dukedom, the title was unconventional, reflecting Edward's willingness to chart a slightly different course within the rigid structures of royalty. Reportedly, Edward himself requested the name, inspired by a character from Shakespeare in Love. It was a small but telling sign. He would not simply follow precedent. He would adapt it to fit his character. The early years of their marriage were a balancing act between private careers and royal duties. Edward ran Ardent Productions, a television and theater company, while Sophie managed her public relations firm. But by 2002, the strain of juggling business responsibilities alongside increasing royal commitments became undeniable. Following a series of minor controversies linked to their companies, both stepped back from professional work, committing themselves fully to the crown's service. It was a turning point, marking the moment Edward's quiet leadership began to shape his long-term legacy. Among his most notable undertakings was assuming responsibility for the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, a program Prince Philip had founded in 1956 to challenge young people worldwide to push beyond their limits through volunteering, physical activity, and skills development. Edward embraced the role with remarkable energy, traveling extensively to meet participants and engage personally in their achievements. Unlike military command or headline-grabbing diplomacy, this work allowed him to shine through consistency, empathy, and a steady hand. He was not chasing fame. He was nurturing potential. One young person at a time, Edward's dedication extended to the armed forces in symbolic yet meaningful ways. Over the years, he took on honorary roles such as Colonel and Chief of the Royal Wessex Yeomanry, Colonel of the London Guards, Honorary Air Commodore of RAF Waddington, and Commodore and Chief of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. While these positions were ceremonial rather than combative, Edward approached them with seriousness, visiting bases, attending ceremonies, and maintaining visible links between the Crown and Britain's armed services. On the international stage, Edward's presence has been quietly indispensable, from representing the United Kingdom at diplomatic events to attending ceremonies that require discretion and dignity. His steady reliability has allowed the monarchy to function smoothly when King Charles or Prince William was unavailable or overextended. Most recently, in 2025, Edward attended the inauguration of Pope Leo XIV, a role that required poise rather than publicity. Edward's evolution is also mirrored in the progression of his titles. In 2023, King Charles formally granted him the title Duke of Edinburgh, fulfilling Prince Philip's long-held wish for his youngest son to inherit the honor. For Edward, it was more than ceremonial recognition. It symbolized a continuation of a legacy rooted in dedication, service, and quiet influence. That acknowledgement deepened further on his 60th birthday in 2024 when he was appointed to the Order of the Thistle, Scotland's highest chivalric order, a distinction reserved for those whose service to the nation is extraordinary. Today, Edward remains one of the family's most dependable figures. When gaps appear due to King Charles's health or Prince William's demanding schedule, it is often Edward who steps in, providing stability, discretion, and unwavering support. He does not seek headlines, yet his influence is undeniable. As the monarchy confronts modern pressures and public scrutiny, Edward's steady presence has become essential, a reminder that sometimes the quietest members of a family, those who choose substance over spectacle, are the ones best suited to carry a legacy forward. In a family often defined by public drama and expectation, Edward has quietly shown that leadership is not always about visibility. Sometimes it is about endurance, reliability, and the patient accumulation of trust, qualities that now make him not just a royal, but a pivotal figure in the crown's unfolding story. So what do you think makes Edward the quietest royal, the one now poised to carry the crown? His subtle choices or steadfast service? We'd love your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.